Welcome back, Valiant Warriors. It's your boy Ken and Nick. We are about to throw down an exciting episode of Valiant Watch. It's all things X-O MANOWAR, going back to the early days, back in 90s Valiant, the OG era. So just buckle yourself in. If you don't know nothing about X-O MANOWAR, this is the best time to jump in, really, with the new series that just got kicked off by Dennis Hopeless. And now you can educate yourselves and be all caught up for the new series. The new number one's already out. Number 2 comes out in November. But let's get into some classics before we get talking about that. All right. So, X-O MANOWAR, Retribution era. All right. We're talking like the first 4 issues. There it is.
Yeah.
Right there, boy. So, I know that's like, this was kind of like your first time kind of going back into some of the old XO. So, how did it? So, like, from your perspective, what was it like when you're reading, like, the old XO compared to, like, from the 2012 on?
Yeah, it's definitely different because, I mean, everybody knows, like, Venditti's 2012 run is just, like, epic for Valiant stuff. I mean, when you're talking, like, where to jump in on Valiant, that run's usually in the discussion pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
This 92 run of XO doesn't really come up as the first thing you should jump into. But, you know, I picked up issue 1, and if I can just, it starts out butt nude X-O MANOWAR. And I'm thinking, why did nobody recommend this to me earlier? Like, I did not know we started like this. But no, it's a book that definitely feels of its time. You feel that early 90s influence in the comics, and you know that pretty much right off the bat. But it also has a bit of a timeless feel to it. You can understand that this is Valiant's flagship character pretty much immediately. And I think it's one of those books that carries that vibe pretty well. You know, and Bob Layton's writing this, Jim Shooter's, I'm sure, and Englehart, you know, helping like plot this and script it. But it's pretty intense. Like, that's Eric is similar to what we see in the 2012 run in that he's kind of brutal and, you know, doesn't care which way or another of somebody else telling him which way to, or, you know, what he should be doing. And we see that a lot in this early run. You kind of see those traits being established, you know, right off the bat. But I have to say, like, I picked up this trade, this Retribution trade, and it's the first, you know, basically the arc. Well, it throws you into even just issue 1 starts at an awkward place. And, you know, he's right there with the spider aliens, and he's going down in the ship and getting the armor and the alien spiders. All right. Yeah, whichever you want to say.
It's such a weird name. I love it though.
Yeah, but he's going down in the ship, he's getting the armor, and I'm thinking, where does this come from? Like, how did this start? And, you know, I made it a few issues in before I was like, I got to look for something else. And there's an issue 0 that dropped. And it really sets the stage that I think this Retribution should have started with in the trade. It would have been a great context for, you know, the number 1 issue that you see Barry Windsor Smith laying out the illustrations. There's really cool stuff, but it throws you into it. And I was like, I love this because I know about XO coming into it because I've read the 2012 run a lot. And this new number 1 was pretty cool. I'm excited for it. So I had the foundational understanding of XO.
Yeah.
But it was, it didn't really feel like, you know, this, I'm reading like the first XO to drop. Like, this is, you know, I'm diving into the origins right here. You know, it didn't give me that vibe.
Yeah. That is one of the weird things that when it was like you said, you got to really the 0. It didn't even really have to be like at the beginning, but if they would have included it at the end, I thought that would have been a much better idea. But Valiant isn't like their old. The way they did their trades way before was just kind of wonky. But like, the one thing that I did like about it, like going back and rereading it like for the first time in I don't even know how long since, like, you know, I was a kid, is that it kind of sets the pace for the series as a whole, that you're going straight into it guns blazing. Like, they really lean in the best way possible, they lean on all the things that make Eric better, like unique. You know, like you said, when he first shows up, it's like he's like legit like a caveman. You know what I'm saying? Like running around with like, you know, hunting saber tooths and like, you know, like not wearing no clothes and stuff because, you know, they didn't then. So it's like it just makes sense. But then they also, I like when they, as they advance him towards the future, you know, after he gets the armor and everything, and he starts calling it like the good skin, and he start learning like actual vocal language. How they don't just he instantly is like, okay, well, I know everything that's going on in the, you know, the 20th century now, and da 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 da. Like they make it, they have this like development, so it's almost like, you know, it's like almost like being like a kid again, and like just really discovering what the superhero tropes are kind of like. You know what I mean? Because as he's learning how to be more than just this hyper-powered barbarian, like how to be like a functional member of modern society, you're kind of like forced to take those steps with him rather than just read along, you know, over the slow development, like as him, as literally as a person, not even just like as XO, you know? So I thought that was cool. I definitely think that was something that when they did their retribution, they should have probably threw in there, because that is, at the very least, it's one of those things where if you didn't know to go, like if you knew to look for it, it's not a big deal. Like you can read like the first 5-10 issues, whatever, and then just go read it later, and it's whatever. But like if you like weren't reading it at the time, or if you didn't like know that it wouldn't be included, like that does throw you for a loop. So I could see where that's definitely something we would hit on. If you're collecting Classic Valiant, make sure you get XO Zero with the number 1.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I was like, well, that's cool. And now that I actually read Zero and was able to go back and catch up, it does make a lot more sense. But I like that you brought up sort of the range of the character, because I'm about halfway through the series now, and you really start to see that development come through in those early issues, like in this Retribution arc. He's pretty intense. You know, there's not a lot of room for like this modern influence that's happening. He's very much like it's a man out of time in one of the most brutal senses possible. And the way that they go about him getting his armor and killing these aliens, and kind of the intensity of it as he rolls into Earth, and he gets started. I forgot where he lands at, where he kind of gets in with that family it's like this woman who's got a daughter, and they're kind of like
in South America or something like that.
Yeah, in South America, I think. And they're like gathering fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. And like he's butt naked still for a lot of this, and it's it's a strange experience for sure, but it sets the stage for I think a range of development that you talked about that kind of gives an idea of a character that feels like a flagship character, that has some good development that you wouldn't expect for a 90s book. You think this is all just like bulging muscles and like these super fast-paced action sequences and stuff like that, but XO has some cool development. He really does. And what you see unfold like with these aliens, I think they're alien spiders. We'll go with that version. But they have is it Orb, the company that ends up coming into play pretty heavily. There's a lot of stuff that is set in these early stages and these early issues that it gives you a full picture of XO pretty quickly. And I think one of the most interesting parts is really the relationship that they establish with Eric and the good skin, because they start it throws you into that dynamic where he is a soft skin and he's fighting against hard skins, which are the alien spiders. And it creates kind of this dichotomy where, now he's able to get into his good skin, what he starts to call it, because he's able to actually do something once he's, in the actual armor. And that was one of the things that I don't think we really see a lot now, him calling it the good skin. I don't know, that's just one of those things that kind of gets lost in time maybe and doesn't translate as well. But I was like, this is a cool little like nod to something like a classic vibe that I would, hope to see from a book like this maybe.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I really liked about it is there's not a lot of characters that have that weird dynamic like with their powers. You know what I'm saying? Like you kind of somewhat get that with like the better like say like Venom stories and stuff like that, but it's still not in the exact same way. Like Eric in the Shanhara armor, it's even then, it's like a silent character. It's almost like a secondary book, just watching the things travel in his travels, because he's not like a regular superhero. So when he fights against the spider aliens, he's not going to sit there and debate like, oh, well, some of them are like part human, so maybe like I should spare those ones. He's like, nah, man, like this is where I'm from. This is how we handle problems. So I'm just going to bash skulls. But then like he has to learn how to like, talk and use force and like, and so it just adds like this cool layer of complexity, seeing like his genuine emotional attachment to the armor. Like it's a tool for him, it's a weapon of war for him, but at the same time it's like it's his first real friend in the modern world, and so it's really cool to see like how that relationship changes too, like as you're going through the issues, when like say in the later ones, like when he's taking over Orb, and he meets Turok and stuff like that, like which we'll have to get on that in a second. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but like even as he builds all these other friendships, it's cool to see how those outside friendships subtly change his dynamic with the armor itself, and that's just like another cool thing that it's like you said, it would be nice to see. I think with the current run, they're kind of trying to lean more on that with making the armor more vocal and so on and so forth. But it's just unique in the way they did it, because that's not, I think you nailed it when you said when you're talking about a 90s comic book, you're not expecting to see this time taken to build like genuine relationships that would make sense, that would translate to real life. Like if I had to imagine what it would be like, say I just woke up like and from a coma or something in like, I don't know, Serbia or somewhere. That'd be too easy. Say like you're in the middle of the Amazon or something, you know what I mean? Like you're just like in the jungle or something, where you have to just completely learn how to be a human being again. Like this feels like how that would feel. And then when you add in the armor and like that sense of security he gets from the armor, it's a lot of just really, it's a lot deeper thinking than you would expect from a dude with a spacesuit that's beating up spider aliens with their gaudy, super long, 3-fingered hands that nobody else seems to notice. Like, it's like they're so creepy. They're so subtly creepy. And like Windsor Smith and really all the art in it, it's like way more well developed and like artistic and like just emotion driven than you would think a book about a barbarian in modern times would be. Like you just don't see that very often. You didn't see it very often then, and you still don't really see it all that often now. And even when you do, it's never really done on that same level of just humanization. And and then the other thing too, like I touched on this a bit, and might as well just transition right into it. Seeing like the characters around him blossom, like particularly the X-O and Turok like bromance, for lack of a better term. They got like the mutual respect those two have for each other is fan-freaking-tastic. Like I said this in a chat in our chat the other day, just kind of joking, where every time X-O pops up and like the spider aliens or whoever is about to start problems, the first thing he does is he's just like, you guys are all useless, I got the good skin, like get out of here and let's handle this. But then like when Turok's there, who's a dude who has no powers, right? Like he's not, he's not like Black Panther or somebody where he has like low level superpowers. He's just a dude that's about his business. And it never occurs to Eric to be like, well, maybe you should fall behind me and I'll lead the charge. He's just like, nah, let's ride, bro. Like it's like about the respect that he has for Turok and Turok has for him, because he defers to him a lot.
Definitely. And I think it's X-O that they meet up and they have this panel where they're like fighting side by side, and like they've got Turok's got this big gun, and it's really cool. As there's a piece of dialogue in there where they say we're cut from the same cloths, and I was like, this is some intense bromance stuff. Like I'm still here for this. Like I needed a spinoff of them automatically. Like they had a chemistry to them, and there was a lot to it that I was just like, wow, I did not see this coming, and I'm such a fan of it.
Yeah, it's almost like it reminds me a lot of like the 2000s like Superman Batman series. You know, like people always especially on the internet, we love to pit the two of them together against each other, and you know, he's OP and blah 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 and this that and the other. But in reality, the two of them work together to be better than the sum total of their parts. Yeah. And it's a lot of the same way with Arik and Turok. Like they do just get each other on that warrior level where they just go into these crazy situations. I think it is in either 14 or 15 where they literally just go right into a spider alien nest, like no hesitation. They're just like, yeah, like I got your back, you got my back, we're good. You know, like at that point they knew the Eternal Warrior and Solar and all the other heroes, like at any given time they could have just been like, all right, let's go get backup, but they're just like, no, we got this. Like, and it's awesome just seeing the two of them be confident in what they do and go up against these odds that even with Arik having all the power that he has being really stacked against them on paper, but it just between just teamwork and just, old school warrior bravado, they just make it work.
Right. And like, it's a weird thing to go back and view, because I was pretty young, like when all this stuff is coming out. Like I did grow up with Turok on the N64. So that was like my introduction to the character. I had no idea at the time that it's, like this Valiant comic. So now I'm going into it and I'm like, oh, I want so much more Turok at Valiant, and it leads me to think, what Savage is doing now with the modern run of Valiant and kind of that role that we're seeing in the universe. Because going back to this and seeing X-O and Turok together, they call Turok Savage like multiple times in it and stuff like that, And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm getting like a modern Valiant vibe out of this like conflict and these dynamics that's happening in the greater Valiant universe, and kind of I guess them toying with genres in it in like this sci-fi and then kind of like this old school way where he has no powers or anything like that. But I think it's at the end of 15 when they're kind of getting out of the nest, and they finally get to the point where they're just like, we got to get out of here. And X-O's like, just get behind me, I'll take care of it real quick, and then just torches everything. I was like, they couldn't just start with torching it. They just hacked their way in through it, And I was like, if that was an option,
man. Like I would kill to have a series of just the two of them, like just going on, almost like how they're doing with like Ryan Rygen, just going on a road trip. Like we're gonna kill dinosaurs and we're gonna kill every spider alien we see, and that's it. Just pure machismo, just destroying their way across America. You know.
I'm so here for that. Like, we need to make that happen. Like a hashtag, or what do we need to do for this? Like,
we're gonna tag everybody at Valiant. You're gonna get tagged in this video just for that segment. But just touching on that too. That was one of the things that going back and like rereading it as an adult, like I didn't have a lot of appreciation for that stuff as a kid. It's like them blasting aliens and then they burn everything down, and I'm like, dope, and then that's it. But like, the reading through the series as an adult now and having like a deeper understanding of like literature and comics and yada yada, it's a really cool element to see added in, because it becomes like a reoccurring theme, like as you go through that volume 1 of X-O MANOWAR, Turok pops up quite a bit. There's a part in, I want to say, I think it starts around issue 19, like 19 to 28 in that era where like Arik just ditches the armor completely to just go live with indigenous people with Turok. And
that's when like Randy starts wearing the suit, right?
Yeah.
Like you get that weird cover of like, I was like, I actually came across that cover of Randy in the suit first, and it's like 23 or something like that, and I was like, whoa, what's happening here? So like I had to like read my way up to it, but he ditches the armor, and then I think towards the end of that you come into the death of Shinhara. So you've got like this weird awkward period, but guess who shows up in that period of turmoil for Arik? Turok. And I was just like, man, this is what I needed. It was good.
Yeah, and what makes that cool too is just it's kind of nuts to think about the fact that they took a character that was not only a flagship character, but it didn't, you can do something with like, all right, like say like with Superman, right? Like after the death of Superman, they brought him back, they gave him, electromagnetic powers and stuff like that. Or even before that, when they did like the 4 different Supermen, like you can play around with a character who's had 40, 50 years of continuity and just kind of mess with them like that. Even with Spider-Man, who didn't have as long of a history, but they slipped in like Ben Reilly and Kane and all that other. I mean, granted, we can debate the merits of the Clone Saga, but but you still have that leeway where you can mess with it because at the end of the day you can always go back to the status quo and nobody's going to really care. But like with something like X-O, even when you're 20 something issues in, that's not the same as having like 20 years in, so the fact that they even touched on something like him ditching the armor and like Randy taking it over, and after a couple issues you can see that they're building towards him coming back, and they were just kind of doing something to shake up the status quo. But you wouldn't know. I mean, if you didn't at the time, especially, they could have done that. Like they could have just been like, all right, well, he lives with Turok now, and that's just what it is, and he'll be they'll reverse the rules completely, and Randy will be the new X-O. And I mean, I would like to see something like that now. It would be cool to have them explore doing the same kind of angle, reintroduce Randy or one of the other Valiant characters. Like they dabbled with that with Livewire a couple times, where in Unity when she's taken over the armor.
You're right. Yeah.
So I mean,
her ability to like manipulate just the technology side of it like that. I don't know if they can play that Randy angle. I would just like to see Randy brought back into this mod. Have we seen Randy? I might be speaking without any merit here. I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, not that I can think of. Definitely, and if we have, there might have been like a passing reference here or there, but not at all.
I feel like that's going to pop up in a comment section where they're like, actually,
Yeah, or get lit up on that one. We'll Google it later. It's all good. But that's again, that would be something cool to just
totally
to go back and explore it, or even just like at the time, when they get caught up by the spider aliens and the armor actually shatters and it's like it's done for. Like that is nuts to do something like that early in a brand new character who like I totally should have checked sales numbers before we did this, but was it's one of the main, like there's a reason why it endured, because people loved X-O. So to just take it to it is nuts. But it just shows the level of, like, I guess you could say, like, the risk taking and like the confidence in where they were going to take X-O, and like it's just really solid stuff, Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it gets kind of to the heart of what I feel like makes this such a classic. And it starts out as like Eric has what he calls the good skin, and it's kind of a fun laugh because it's like, oh, it's a joke, and it's a play on his rudimentary understanding of like our communications, our language, kind of modern English, and he talks like that. But it starts to develop and kind of unravel into he's engaging with his powers in a way, like you said, that you don't really see often. And it takes shape, or it comes alive through this Shannara armor. And I feel like that's something that's a fundamental trait of X-O. And as we build up, 20 something issues in, you get the death of Shannara. And that is pretty risky stuff to just jump into. And I think it works really well. I think, they're willing to do things and not feel like they're holding back in this series. And so when you look at, what makes X-O Manowar, what are the traits that you need to know coming in to, get an understanding of this character, the series hits on them all, and it does it really well too. Within the first few issues, you get a pretty good understanding of what X-O's about, having the armor. But as you read through the series, you get a better understanding of the interaction with the armor and what makes this character different than, this is just Iron Man wielding a hammer or something like that. It's something that stands the character, it makes the character stand apart from anything else, in comics.
And that's the thing, is that when you look at the premise, like here's like just to break it down, right? If you're just now jumping in or whatever, here's the basic premise of X-O MANOWAR. All right, it's like the man out of time story. You got a dude who, from primitive times, gets kidnapped by aliens, steals a super advanced suit of armor, comes back to modern day because space travel, so on and so forth. By the time he gets back home, it's been, X amount of centuries.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, that's like a premise that you have to really peel the layers like an onion to make it something more than just this dude comes back, he's on a revenge mission, and then you just had like Splatterhouse type fun where he's just tearing aliens apart and everything. And don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I was about to say.
All of that stuff is amazing. Yep. And if they really wanted to, that could have been like the whole book for the most part. And they, just whatever, every now and then throw in some new aliens or new weapons or whatever. And you can keep following it for a long time. I mean, Captain America essentially ran for like 20 years. His first 20 years is basically on that same, not the man at a time part just yet, but that same premise. You just got one group of bad guys and you just I mean, G.I. Joe, same deal.
Yeah.
But to go and be like, okay, well, we're gonna introduce, like this dude Ken, who's like his sidekick, but not really, because he's got like his own kind of agendas, and he's not a bad dude per se, but he's not super likable sometimes, but he's also just very human. Like that's one thing I like about all of the people in the supporting cast, particularly, is that they're not made up to be like these idealized versions of people. If you're a guy who is privy to all of these secrets, like spider aliens used to be your boss, and the guy who's in charge now is like this ignorant Cro-Magnon with ridiculous levels of power that's pretty easy to trick into whatever you want. Like, you're not, most people aren't going to be the most savory people in their dealings with, a guy like X-O all the time. Yeah. And then you add in like Randy and like her backstory, she's like former Black Ops spook type character. She's got like these shifty friends that pop up here and there. For the most part, they seem to mean well, but there's always like that element of, it's like a Black Widow thing where there's like you get bits and pieces of backstory, but there's red in the ledger and this, that, and the other. So there's still that air of mystery. Yeah. But they go above and beyond to really just make them more than, okay, well, he's like the Superman character of Valiant, and Randy's like his Lois Lane, and then here's like a ripoff of Jimmy Olsen, and so on and so forth. Like, they just really make them all unique, and it makes them all like, what is Randy's friend's name? Like John or something like that. I can't remember his name. John Luke or something.
Oh, yeah.
That gets killed in the spider's nest. Like, he's just some dude, right? And he's, if you really think about it, he's not all that important to the core of the story, like at all. But when he gets taken out while they're trying to escape, you're like, man, like you really feel that, because even in that short period of time that he's been in there, they made him seem like a genuinely good dude. Like, yeah, he does shady stuff because he's, like a CIA former spook, but and every time you see him, he's like, yeah, we used to do, Black Ops assassinations, whatever. But like his interactions with like Eric and Randy and so on and so forth, you're like, hey, he's a pretty good dude, man. Like he's very loyal. He's in this weird situation that, by all accounts, anybody with any sense would just be like, you know what, I'll write you a letter or something every now and then, but until you get all that sorted, I'm just gonna go to like meet me in Montauk. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm outie. but it's just all these little things, all these little things that cumulatively make X-O such a lasting idea. Of all the I'm going on a rant here, but I know like of all the Valiant characters since like the Acclaim version and like the 2012 relaunch, X-O is one of the ones that's had the least amount of things really changed about. And in the 2012 version, he's a little bit more, I guess you could say, of an intellectual, because they kind of put him forward in time as a Visigoth as opposed to like a straight up caveman. But, but for the most part though, like learning the intricacies of modern society, and that I got a strong sword arm, so I know what's up. Like all of those elements in like the reverence, but also the respect for even like the spider aliens, you know, like he hated them, but he still had a healthy respect for how destructive they were. And that was another thing that translated over with the Vine in the 2012 version and onwards. So it's just, it's crazy to see how much stuff stemmed from this book that's essentially about a dude on a road trip tearing apart aliens.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, it does have a different feel to it. I mean, I think there's a panel. I think it's in the second or third issue when he's got the armor. He's in modern time and he comes across this house and kills a bunch of them, you know, and then it has their corpses kind of strewn across the house. And she comes home and she's like, "What is going on here?" And he's just like, "What? You don't have servants to burn the bodies?" And then he like torches them. And then he's like, let no one say Eric is an ungrateful guest as he flies away. Like it's crazy stuff that goes on like that. And I love that you mentioned him being kind of like a caveman in this one, because you do get that vibe where it's just like way out of left field with some of his stuff, you know? And in the 2012 run, he is a bit more intellectual. He might have a better understanding of like the context of being displaced from time. Because in this one, there's kind of no connection in that, you know? And what's super interesting to me, though, is like going back to read this after the relaunch of the new #1, because it's easy to see the new #1 is really diving into that relationship between Eric and the armor. And that's something that as I read this series, it feels something that's just like the core of the character, you know, more so than them wielding this awesome flaming sword or just being a dude out of time. It's really that engagement with the armor and the power or the skill set, like you said, that makes this character stand out. And that seems to be what Layton and this creative team really had in mind as they introduced both Eric and this armor, and you kind of see that relationship unfold through the series. You get a lot of cool stuff in with Turok and, you know, how he's engaging with both these aliens and this modern world. But the backdrop of it is really just those dynamics between Eric and the armor. And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, that's something you touched on there. With like the Dennis Hopeless #1, and no spoilers because we read #2. But anyway, but like that's one thing that I think that the 2012 stuff, they didn't necessarily skip over it, like it's still there. But I like that that's in the relaunch #1 is something that they're making front and center, because it was such a big deal in the original series. And it's I lost my train of thought there for a second. Okay, so and the cool thing about it though is that you kind of it's like you kind of have to take a minute, you know, to just sit back and be like, okay, when we did the 2012 stuff, there was, you know, they explored Shanhara. Like there was a times where like Livewire connected with it and was like, okay, this is like more than just a machine and so on. You know, they had all the cool visuals and everything. But like, if you really look at X-O, aside from, you know, like my homegirl, General Capshaw, or like his alien wife, and, you know, like little bits and pieces of stuff like that, they don't really take the time to really do much to establish him as with a modern life. You know, like he found his people and he brought him back to Earth after like Planet Death and everything, and then like, you know, married a Visigoth woman and everything. But like, that doesn't advance him really, because that's still this tiny little pocket of 6th century life that he's trying to hold on to in the modern day. And like in some elements it works, and then a lot it does not. You know, there's a reason why there's not a ton of Visigoths running around. Minor spoiler alert, I guess, if you haven't read it. But to go back and be like, okay, well, how about this time we just go straight to basics, and instead of making the focus to be all external, we make it more internal. I think that's just a really good, fresh perspective that hasn't been touched on that in this particular way since the original one.
Yeah, such a good point, really, because it's kind of what I was hoping out of doing this episode, and like looking back at what makes these flagship Valiant characters actually flagship characters, because there's a timeless sense to the execution of these early books that let them hit the ground running and kind of stand the test of time to be able to still be putting out new #1 books here in 2020. It's something that I was hoping would kind of help give me a better understanding. And of course, reading the origins, and I've read the first few books before, but taking a deep dive into the series and kind of understanding what made it tick, it really gives some good insight as to what Valiant's doing now and what they're doing with the current series. And it's really cool to see them tap into that, because it's obvious that's what Layton and the rest of the creative team's doing here. And it's kind of the most memorable part. By the time you get to 28, or I think it's 28, that's the death, when the alien spiders are doing like the neural disruptors, and that's how they take the armor down. It's just such a tragic moment, and like it's not just somebody's tech failing or something like that. You start to see how they're tapping into what was once a joke in the first issue with him saying, "I've got my good skin." It's now built up into something that they can use it for a moment of tragedy, because it's had such development for it. And didn't expect that. Didn't see that coming. Just cool stuff. God, like just so cool. I'm here for him killing aliens.
Yeah, and to do it in like such a small window, because, like you said, it's just 28. Like it's not 28 of like volume 4. Like that's, what I'm saying. So you really think like, man, they did all that and just over 24 issues. Like that's nuts. Like you wouldn't get like in the feels if, say, when like Hal Jordan's ring gets crushed by like Sinestro or something like that, or when there's bazillions of times Tony Stark's been beaten out of a suit of armor, like whatever. But you see these spider aliens gang up on Shannara with the neural disruptors and everything, and you're just like, is this really happening right now? Are they really about to let this happen? And it's kind of, of course, obviously it's going to move on. They're going to figure something out later down the road, because it's comics. But at the same time, they can still get you to that point. Even like all these years after the fact, like you still have those. You're like, no, calm down. You already know what's going to happen. Push it down. Watch an Old Yeller or something. Like it's going to happen, but you still get. You're like, I'm a man.
It's true, like, and that's something that like I didn't know that was coming, but it also really helps to inform what we're reading now. And I really love that we can dig into the origins of the Valiant Classic and really see what's happening now and what's so important about the character and what makes X-O stand the test of time. And as much as I would love to say like all of that is the most memorable thing, I will have to say the most memorable thing of all of my reading so far are Lydia's creepy hands. I don't know, you mentioned it earlier in the episode. Like as cool as X-O and Shannara are together, like every panel where Lydia's hands creep up into the panel, I'm just like, oh no, how are you all not freaked out? Like,
that's such a small, like that's one of those things where like I think I just mind wipe it. Because every time you go back, or even if like while you're reading it and you go back to those first couple of issues when they really kind of introduce the differences and make a point to make the spider alien human hybrids stand out, it's such a small thing because it's just fingers.
Yeah.
But just the way they're drawn, you're just like, oh, like like you can just like you can feel it on your skin, like it's just gross. Like if you think about bugs, you just get itchy. It's like the same thing. It's like such a small thing, but that's one of those things where like all these years later, you still are just like, oh, that's so gross. But like, how is everyone else freaking out? Like, how are they just standing there, not just like blasted? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you guys just shooting? Like
I actually thought there's one in like I think it's issue 2 or 3 where everything else in the page looks great, and then she's got her hand up. And just the index finger is like crazy long. And I was just like, what am I looking at right now? Like, so I like flipped the page to see like, are they doing this in all of them? And then you start to notice that these people have creepy hands, and like, there's like little nuanced things that you kind of can gloss over if you're not paying attention, but it adds like some really creepy stuff into it. And like all of the whole design really, I mean, In page one, I think I actually screenshotted it because I bought these. The Barry Windsor Smith artwork in this first issue of the layout, it carries on through the rest of the series, and you can notice little things like the hands or the intricate details in X-O's armor, and you can actually see how it changes through the different issues and stuff, and kind of how it develops. Because by the time you get into, like, I'm in the 30s now, I'm in 33, I think, and it looks way different, like, than the first issue. And I've seen the last of the series, and you start to get to a totally different look for the armor. But it's kind of those visuals that really help this book to be something other than just a cool story. It's got a 90s flair to it for sure, and like I could totally watch X-O just kill a bunch of alien spiders over and over. But it was those little things, like a bunch of like just dialogue filled panels, but there's one creepy hand in it that you're just like, oh god, and you hurry up and turn the page because it's creepy. And like that's what's fun about it, and I think that's super exciting. And I want to see more of that and stuff now. I really do.
Yeah. And, well, I don't got too much more to add to that. I think that's a good note to go out on. But I will say this. It's the thing that I love about books like X-O MANOWAR is that when you think about it's really easy to let nostalgia blind you. But when it comes to 90s comics, it's also extremely easy to just dunk on them because, like, Aquaman mullet, and like everybody had like spikes and straps and like unnecessary pouches and all this other crap. Like there was a lot of I'm not going to completely defend all 90s comic books because a lot of them were not good. But for everyone that was that, then you have something like X-O. It's like a lot of that other stuff was like Virtual Boy. This was like getting a Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo on Christmas. You know what I'm saying? Like the level of how well they've endured the test of time when you want to talk about 90s things, because it really made me think about that when you were talking about just the different, like the layouts and stuff, not just the Barry Windsor Smith art itself, but like the layouts and so on. And, the things that like Bob Layton and stuff did. It's just that whole feel. It's like, it's inherently 90s, but you could put it like, I would put X-O MANOWAR #0 up against pretty much anything on the shelf right now and be like, tell me that doesn't hold up. You know what I'm saying? And that's nuts, because you couldn't just put like this. You couldn't just go to a dollar bin and grab some stuff from the 90s and then take it over to the new comic rack at any comic book store in America or wherever and be like, I guarantee that what I just grabbed is as good as whatever I'm going to just randomly grab off the shelf. You're going to lose that bet like 99.99999% of the time. But you can go through literal dozens of issues of X-O MANOWAR, and you're like, in a time where they didn't really have to try this hard, it's nuts how much stuff they put into it in just small detail, big detail, all of it, from the character development to the action. So I just got to wrap it up by saying, if you're looking for a new, not just story, but like an entire franchise of great stories, X-O MANOWAR #1 on the shelves now. Pick it up and then go on ahead and back it on up and yank these boys up. Good. I mean, you can really just start at the beginning of any story arc and you're going to be floored by just how well they've endured over time.
Yeah, it's so true. It really is. And it's one of the things that was super exciting about doing this episode and really reading and taking a deeper dive into the actual origins of the classic X-O MANOWAR. Because, it's pretty intense. It's a naked caveman type guy killing aliens, for the first few pages. And it's got a 90s feel to it. It really does. But I think it's something that it shows that not every 90s book is what people describe 90s comics as. They were doing really cool things at the time, and this book holds up as a great story. And it has for 30 plus issues now. So it's a series that I'm not even quite done with it. And it's easy to see that, they held their own for the whole series, and it's exciting to dive into. And to give context to what Valiant's doing now, it's easy to see that they both like respect the character's history and are excited to push it in kind of a new direction. that taps into what made the character so timeless in these early runs in this 92 XO. So it's just really cool stuff to see what they're doing. And as a fan, it really doesn't get any better, right? Like that's
took the words out of my mouth. Yeah. So, all right, Valiant Warriors, thank you for joining us. You might want to hit play. Well, after we're done, you might just restart this whole thing, but do it with a copy of XO in your hand and just go along for the ride, and it'll just be a fantastic time. But anyways, until next time, support your local comic book shops, pick up X-O MANOWAR #1, pre-order #2 if you haven't already, and stay valiant, my friends.